I was 31 years old and had just made $38 million in a single transaction, which meant I was sitting alone in my apartment at 2 in the morning, staring at the same email I'd been staring at for 20 minutes, unable to feel the thing I was supposed to feel. The email was from Gallagher Finance, confirming the final wire transfer from the acquisition of Meridian Security Systems. The number was real. The deposit had cleared. My chief of staff, Rachel, had already sent me 3 congratulatory messages, escalating in tone from formal to something that looked like it came from an actual human being. My company, the one I'd built in a converted warehouse in South Seattle while my siblings were closing million-dollar deals and posting about their lives on LinkedIn, had finally sold. 7 years. 7 years of sleeping 4 hours a night, of hiring people smarter than me and trying not to be threatened by it, of nearly going bankrupt twice, of watching competitors with more funding and better connections fail while we somehow survived. 7 years of my family asking, in that careful way they did, whether I'd considered going back to school or trying something more stable. And now I had money. More money than my father had made in his entire career as a philosophy professor. More money than my brother Lucas probably saw in a year, though he would never admit it. More money than my sister Natalie could envision, despite her marriage to a man whose business cards probably cost more than my first car. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired and hungry and strangely empty, the way you feel at 3 in the morning when you've been waiting for something for so long that the moment it arrives, you're already thinking about what comes next. My phone buzzed. Not a congratulatory message this time. Lucas. A text, not a call. Family meeting. Sunday. Mom's surgery moved up. Dad's worse. Need to discuss care options. Call me when you get this. I read it 3 times. Then I opened another window, pulled up the news, and found a story about my mother from the Silver Lake Gazette, a small piece about Patricia Carter, longtime hospital volunteer and wife of retired Professor Richard Carter, undergoing spinal fusion surgery. The photo was from maybe 5 years ago. She looked tired even then. That's when I actually felt something. Not about the money. About being gone. I had left Silver Lake at 24 with $14,000 in savings, a degree in cybersecurity that my parents had indulged like you indulge a child's phase, and a deep, unshakable conviction that I could not spend one more second in a place where success was measured in predictable increments. My father had suggested law school. My mother had mentioned that a friend's daughter had a connections in investment banking. Lucas, already established in his CFO role, had offered to introduce me to people. I had thanked them, packed my car, and driven west with a playlist and a hunger I couldn't name. The thing about being the youngest, the unconventional one, the child who didn't fit the family template, it creates a strange kind of invisibility. Not the invisibility of neglect, but something more precise. It's the invisibility of being decided about. Your siblings are achieving things that make sense. You are doing something that doesn't. Therefore, you must be struggling. You must be in need of guidance. You must, at some fundamental level, need us more than we need you. I never corrected this. It was easier not to. It was also useful. When I sold Meridian, I did not post about it on social media. I did not call home. I did not send a press release. I simply existed in the knowledge of it the way you exist in your own body, aware of it, present in it, but not constantly announcing it to the world. Rachel handled the professional communications. My lawyer handled the financial arrangements. I went for a run around Green Lake and then sat in my apartment and looked at the number until it stopped seeming like a number and started seeming like an abstraction. Now I was looking at Lucas's text, and I understood something that I had perhaps always understood but never quite articulated. They needed to keep me small. Not maliciously. It just worked better that way. If I was fine, if I was actually fine, If I had actually succeeded in the way that rich people succeed, then what did that say about their decisions? What did it say about the advice they had offered, the pity they had extended, the subtle, persistent belief that I needed them? I texted back, "I'll be there. Sunday." Rachel knew immediately that something had shifted. She had that quality. The ability to read atmospheric pressure changes the way a bird reads wind. I'd hired her 4 years ago, when Meridian was finally stable enough to require actual leadership infrastructure, and she had understood without ever being told that I did not want a cheerleader. I wanted someone who could see through me. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. She was looking at her calendar, already calculating coverage. For a week. Maybe 2. Family emergency. Not exactly. But family obligation, and those can feel like emergencies if you let them. Rachel leaned back in her chair. Her office was 2 doors from mine, and it was meticulously organized in a way that suggested either profound control issues or a profound need to compensate for chaos elsewhere. I'd never asked which. "You know what you're walking into, right?" "Yes." "And you're going anyway?" "Yes." "Because?" I could have said, "Because they're getting old." Because I've been gone for 7 years, and in that time my father's memory has started dissolving and my mother has worn her body down to the point where surgery is necessary. Because there's a kind of silence that gets louder the longer you maintain it, and I've been maintaining it very efficiently, and I think it might be time to let it break. Instead, I said, because I can. Because I should. Because I've been preparing for this in ways I didn't fully understand until I could actually afford to. Rachel nodded. She sent an email to Daniel Hayes, our head of security and logistics, flagging my travel. Daniel was ex-military, the kind of person who had spent his career thinking in terms of assets and vulnerabilities and operational readiness. He understood resource allocation the way other people understood breathing. When Rachel told him I was going home and that I wanted everything arranged discreetly, he understood without elaboration. The helicopter was Daniel's idea, though I would choose the moment of deployment. "You could fly commercial," he'd said, in the tone of someone presenting both options fairly before explaining why one was obviously wrong. "But if this is a positioning move, and I'm reading it as a positioning move, you want no paper trail of reservation changes or flight patterns that could be studied in advance. You want logistics that can be executed without warning. You want them to be present for the moment of arrival, not speculation leading up to it." "That's not why," I'd said. "Maybe not as the primary reason," Daniel agreed. "But it serves that purpose anyway." So the logistics were in place, waiting for deployment. A helicopter based in Boston, ready to be called within the hour. Arrangements made at a privately owned estate in Vermont, one that I had purchased 6 months ago through a shell company that no one in my family would connect to me. An estate that had been converted, painstakingly, into something like a home. Not an institution. Not a facility. A home, with medical infrastructure integrated so seamlessly that you could walk through it and see only space and light and care. "You've thought about this for a long time," Rachel said, reading over my shoulder even though there was nothing for her to read. "Since the day I left," I said. "I've been thinking about leaving that place better than I found it. I didn't understand that until now. I just knew that I couldn't stay." Sunday came with clear skies and that specific quality of Massachusetts spring where you can feel the Atlantic trying to moderate the season. I wore jeans and a sweater from a discount chain. I wore shoes that cost less than a nice dinner. I had spent 7 years in Seattle building a company that protected the digital infrastructure of some of the largest corporations in America. And I was walking toward my family home in clothes that signaled, I am still struggling. I am still the same. Nothing has changed. The house was the same too, which was somehow shocking. A 6-bedroom colonial on 3 acres overlooking the lake. Dock. Pool. The kind of property that represented a specific stratum of American success, inherited old money mixed with professional achievement, the kind of wealth that doesn't need to announce itself because the address does all the talking. My mother came out onto the porch before I'd fully gotten out of the car. She looked smaller. That was the first thing I noticed. Smaller and older and bent slightly in a way that suggested pain was chronic now, not acute. The surgery was necessary because her spine had given out, not because of a single traumatic event. This was what 7 years of not coming home looked like: sudden geometry in a face you'd last seen softer, darker at the temples, a particular set to the shoulders that meant she'd been compensating for something for a long time. "Emmer," she said, and her voice was the same, which made the visual change even more disorienting. "You look thin." "Hi, Mom," I said, and I meant the embrace even though I could feel her trying not to wince when I held her. "How are you feeling?" "Better before surgery than I will be immediately after," she said, which was honest enough to make me pause. "But I'll be better afterward eventually." The doctor seemed confident. She released me and looked at me more carefully. The assessment was automatic and maternal, and it involved registering every detail of my appearance and comparing it to some internal database of who I was supposed to be. I watched her conclude that I was still inadequately housed, inadequately dressed, inadequately positioned for success. The relief on her face was slight but visible. "Lucas is in the study," she said. "Natalie's coming with Michael after he finishes golfing." "And your father is?" She paused. The pause lasted too long. "He's upstairs. He's been having a difficult week." I had not seen my father in 7 years. Our conversations during that time had occurred via phone, and they'd had the quality of two people trying to maintain a relationship with someone they could not quite remember. Not forgotten, exactly. Just not quite remembered in the way that felt fully real. "I'll go say hello before the meeting," I said. "He might not," and my mother started, then stopped. "He might not remember that you were here at Christmas." "That's okay," I said, and I meant it. "I remember. I had come home at Christmas, 3 years ago, for 4 days. My father had still been sharp then, though I could detect the edges of something loosening in his thinking, ideas that repeated, a slight, almost imperceptible lag before complex sentences assembled themselves. He had been working on a book, or perhaps the idea of a book. Something about Kant and artificial intelligence. I had helped him reorganize his notes one afternoon while my siblings were occupied with their lives, and we had talked about the problem of consciousness in a way that felt like all the conversations we'd ever had, crystallized. I had not come back after that, and he had declined more than I'd understood. The study was dark. That was my first sense of it, the heaviness of closed curtains on a room that had always been full of light. My father was sitting in his chair, the one he'd occupied for at least 30 years of my life, reading a book I didn't think he was actually reading because the page didn't appear to be turning. "Dad," I said quietly, not to startle him. He looked up. For a moment there was nothing. Then recognition, but the wrong kind, the kind where he was trying to fit me into a category. Finally, Emmer. "You've come home." "I have," I said, sitting down across from him. This close, I could see the specific forgetting that had begun to colonize his face. It wasn't dementia, not yet. It was earlier than that. It was the erosion of the patterns that make you continuous with yourself. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine," he said, which was the answer he gave to everything now, from what I understood. "Your mother worries too much." "She's always been a worry." "She's having surgery," I said gently. "I know," he said. "I'm not confused about that." But there was something uncertain in his voice, a question mark at the end of a statement. He put the book down. I'm working on something. A project. I know. About Kant. How did you know that? You mentioned it before. He processed this, and I watched him struggle for context. When? Last time I was home. We worked on your notes together. He looked at me more carefully. Some kind of calculation was happening. That seems like a long time ago, he said finally. It was a long time ago, I agreed. He settled back in his chair. I'm glad you're here, he said, which seemed to exhaust something in him. The house feels like it's missing someone. I couldn't figure out who. Now I know. I wanted to tell him then. I wanted to say, I built something. I built something real and good, and it's worth more than you believe. I did it without your guidance. I did it in a way that makes no sense by any logic you'd recognize. And I succeeded. I succeeded so thoroughly that I can afford to come home now and take care of things the way they should be taken care of. Instead, I said, get some rest. There's a meeting later. I know, he said, though his eyes were already closing. I'll be there. The study that housed the family meeting was a different room, my mother's study, which had always felt like a place where actual thoughts happened, unlike my father's archive of intentions. Lucas was already there when I arrived, reviewing documents on his laptop with the focused intensity of a man for whom financial analysis was a kind of prayer. He looked up, assessed me in the way he'd assessed me for 30 years, and found me wanting in all the usual ways. Too pale. Too tired. Too dressed from discount chains. Too lacking in the particular shine that success produces in the right circles. You came, he said, which was not congratulatory. You texted. I wasn't sure you would. It's been a long time. 7 years, I said, settling into one of the leather chairs that had been here since my childhood. I'm not hard to reach, though. No, Lucas agreed, which was technically true. But you're easy to ignore. I let that land. Lucas had always been the articulate one, the one who could say cutting things in a neutral tone that made you question whether they'd been cutting at all. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my entire wardrobe, and he was reviewing spreadsheets that probably represented millions in managed assets. He had 2 children, a wife who did charity work, a beach house on Martha's Vineyard. He was the kind of success that looked like success. Tell me about Mom's surgery, I said. He did, pulling up medical records on his laptop with the efficiency of someone who had already mastered this information. Spinal fusion. 2 levels. Some arthritis, some discal material, the usual breakdown of a body that had maintained posture and social engagement for 72 years. The recovery would be 3 months minimum. Physical therapy would be intensive. She would need help. Natalie and I have looked at some facilities, he continued, pulling up a different document. Top-tier places, good reviews, medical oversight. I can get Mom into Bellwood in Springfield. They have an excellent post-surgical program. Mom would hate it there, I said quietly. Mom will hate not being able to walk upstairs more, Lucas replied. We don't have the luxury of preferences right now. And Dad? Lucas closed his laptop. This was the harder conversation. Dad is declining. Faster than we expected. The neurologist wants him on medication, but the real issue is that he needs more supervision than Mom can provide, especially while she's recovering. Has anyone asked them what they want? I said. They want to stay at home, Lucas said, in the tone of someone explaining an obvious impossibility. Which is not actually viable. So wants become a secondary concern compared to what's actually possible. Natalie arrived then with Michael, and the conversation became distributed among 4 people instead of 2. Michael was a consultant, one of those men whose job title never quite clarified what he actually did. He was competent and professional and fundamentally uninterested in anything that didn't have immediate application to business strategy. Natalie had been trained since birth in the graceful management of social hierarchies, and she deployed this training now, smoothing over Lucas's directness, adding warmth to information that was essentially cold. They had already decided everything. This became clear as the meeting progressed. They had toured facilities. They had requested information packets. They had consulted with a geriatric care coordinator. They had calculated costs. They had determined that Mom would go to Bellwood for rehabilitation and then to Meadowbrook in Providence for long-term care. Dad would be placed in an adult day program 5 days a week while Mom recovered, with the understanding that long-term placement would follow. "We'll all contribute financially," Lucas was saying, and he pulled up another spreadsheet. "I'm putting in $50,000 for initial costs. The facilities are expecting ongoing monthly contributions from family. Emma, we're not sure what you can manage, maybe $2,000 or $3,000 a month?" I heard myself breathe. I heard the sound of it, the simple fact of oxygen entering my body and being expelled, and I realized that I was very angry. Not hot angry. Cold angry. The kind of anger that calcifies into strategy. "I can manage more than that," I said quietly. "Well, we don't want you to overextend," and Natalie said kindly. "I know you've been building your business, but these things can be unpredictable." "My business sold," I said. 2 weeks ago. For $63 million. The silence that followed was not dramatic. It was not the kind of silence where everything changes in an instant. It was more like the moment when you notice that a sound you've been hearing for so long that it became background has finally stopped. The absence of something familiar is almost more disorienting than its presence. Lucas was the first to recover. "That's congratulations," he said, but it was perfunctory, and I could see him immediately recalibrating the situation. His financial assessment of me, which he'd internalized years ago, was suddenly invalid. He was trying to reconstruct it in real time, and it was visibly uncomfortable. "What do you mean, sold?" Michael asked, in the tone of a man who had asked this question before about other ventures that had failed to materialize. "I mean, I founded a cybersecurity company in Seattle," I said. "Built it from nothing. Grew it to 200 employees. Sold it to a larger firm that wanted our technology and team. The acquisition was completed 14 days ago. But we thought," and Natalie started. "You thought I was struggling," I finished. "You were allowed to think that because I never corrected you. I let you believe that I was doing okay. I never said I was failing. But I made sure you had enough information to maintain the narrative that made sense to you." "That's not. Why would you do that?" Lucas was genuinely confused, and there was something almost endearing about it. "Why wouldn't you tell us?" "Because the moment you knew I was succeeding," I said, the dynamic would shift. And I wasn't ready for it to shift. I was too busy building something. The family meeting disbanded after that, dissolving into conversations that were ostensibly normal but were actually rapid negotiations of a new hierarchy. Lucas wanted details about the acquisition. Michael wanted to know about the valuation methodology. Natalie wanted to know about my current employment. Was I staying with the acquiring company? Was I traveling? Was I planning to relocate? I answered some of these questions. I deflected others. By the time they left for their respective homes, it was clear that they were now trying to integrate me into a different category than the one I'd occupied before, and they were struggling because there weren't any protocols for how to do it. Only my mother asked me directly, late that evening, in the kitchen where she'd made me tea exactly as I remembered it. Are you happy? She asked. Yes, I said. And it was true, though the happiness was complicated and didn't taste like what I'd expected it to taste like. Even though you left us? Because I left you, I said. Not to hurt you, but because I couldn't become who I needed to be while I was here. This place has rules about how success looks, and what you're allowed to want, and who gets to be the competent one. I didn't fit, so I had to go. My mother absorbed this. She drank her tea. You could have told us, as she said finally. I know, I said. But you needed to believe one thing, and I needed to believe another. The belief you needed was that I was fine on my own, even if I was struggling. It made sense of your own choices. It made you feel like the good parent because you let me go, but the right parent because you worried about me. That's not fair, she said. It's not meant to be fair, I replied. It's meant to be true. We didn't solve anything that night. But something shifted. The exhaustion in her shoulders seemed to lessen slightly, or perhaps I was just seeing more clearly because I was no longer maintaining the fiction of helplessness. Sunday passed. Monday arrived with a quality of holding breath. The surgery was scheduled for Wednesday. My mother was undergoing the pre-surgical workup, and my father had one of his better days, where the forgetting seemed to retreat slightly and he was more himself than not. On Tuesday afternoon, I called Daniel. Package ready? I asked. Vermont or Massachusetts? He replied. Massachusetts first. Then Vermont. Timing? Tomorrow. After the family gets back from the hospital. Evening. He understood. He'd already been monitoring the surgical schedule, the recovery protocols, the probable discharge timeline. He knew which facilities we were ostensibly considering. He knew the family dynamics. He knew that I was positioning something. It's going to look like a statement, he said, not judgment ally. It is a statement, I agreed. But it's also the best care available. Understood. We'll be ready. The surgery went well. That was what the doctor told us while we sat in the recovery room, my mother coming up from anesthesia in the slow, undignified way that people do. She would be sore. She would be immobilized. She would require intensive physical therapy. But the surgical goals had been achieved. The degenerative material was removed. The fusion was solid. She would recover. We were released into the terrible liminal space of post-operative care, where everything is about managing pain and infection risk and the loss of autonomy. My mother was installed in a recovery room at the hospital, and we were told to go home and rest, as if we could. Instead, I suggested we gather at the family home. I said Lucas should bring copies of the facility brochures. I said we should all be on the same page about next steps. The tone was moderate. The suggestion was simple. No one questioned it. By 7 o'clock, we were assembled in the study again. The late afternoon light had that golden quality that made the room feel almost peaceful, almost like a place where reasonable decisions could be made. Lucas had the brochures arranged. Natalie was taking notes. My father was present but quiet. Michael was checking his phone. I've been thinking about what's best, Lucas was saying. And I believe Bellwood is the right call for Mom. The post-operative program is. That was when we heard it. A sound that didn't belong in that room, in that moment, in the logic of that conversation. A low, thrumming sound that started at the edges of hearing and grew louder. Helicopter blades. My father looked up. What is that? That, I said quietly, is for us. No one moved. They all looked at me as if I had suddenly started speaking a language they didn't recognize. I stood, walked to the French doors, and opened them. The helicopter was descending toward the lawn, the grass flattening under the rotor wash, the late sun catching its sleek black body and turning it into something that looked impossible. It was impossible, in the context of a family meeting about assisted living facilities. It was impossible, given what we all believed about who I was. Emma, what is this? Lucas's voice was sharp. He'd stood now too. This is a better option, EI said. For Mom and Dad. For all of us. The helicopter touched down. The rotors slowed. Daniel stepped out, moving with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly how much space he occupied and how to move through the world without asking permission. If you'd all come with me, EI said, I want to show you something. The estate in Vermont was 3 hours north, deep in the landscape of small towns and state forests that characterize the region's quieter corners. It was 6,000 square feet, built in the federal style, situated on 40 acres that no one could remember acquiring. The interior was light and open in the way that spaces designed for accessibility tend to be: wider hallways, custom bathroom fixtures, kitchen arrangements that accommodated both independence and assistance. But it didn't look like a facility. It looked like someone's home. Like someone wealthy and thoughtful had purchased a historic property and renovated it with the specific goal of making it beautiful. We arrived at dusk. The sky was turning purple at its edges. I led them through the main corridor, where light came through windows I'd selected specifically for the quality of illumination they provided. I showed them the master suite, where I'd had a medical monitoring system installed that was essentially invisible. I showed them the second suite, equally beautiful, where my father could maintain his own space. In the common areas, we encountered staff. A registered nurse. A chef. A physical therapist. A memory care specialist. A coordinator who managed medication, appointments, and the basic logistics of the day. They were professional and kind, and they didn't make a show of competence. They simply existed in the space as people who knew what they were doing. I don't understand, my mother said. She was in a wheelchair still, her mobility compromised by the fresh surgery, but her eyes were clear. Whose is this? Mine, EI said. I purchased it 6 months ago. I've spent the time since then designing it specifically for what you and Dad need. Not what some facility designer assumes you need. What you actually need. My brother was walking through the space, touching walls, his calculation machinery running at maximum speed. How much did this cost? He asked finally. More than I used to have, EI said. Less than I have now. But the acquisition was 2 weeks ago. I've been planning this since I left Massachusetts, EI interrupted. I've known for years that you two would age. I've known that I wanted to be positioned to handle it in a particular way. The sale of my company accelerated the timeline, but this was always going to happen. My sister was standing in the middle of the great room, looking at the architecture, at the light, at the integration of medical capability into space that felt like home. You did this, she said quietly, without telling anyone. Yes, EI said. Why? Michael asked. I looked at him, and then at Lucas, and then at Natalie. Because if I had told you, you would have told me I was being impractical. You would have told me to use your connections, let your expertise guide the decision. You would have needed to be part of it, to have some claim on it. And this isn't about you. It's about them. I gestured toward my parents, toward my mother in her wheelchair, toward my father who was standing quietly by the window, understanding something about the light. That's not fair, Luca said, but there was less anger in it than confusion. We're your family. I know, I said. And I'm yours. But family isn't a single thing. It doesn't all need to function the same way. I've spent 7 years building something you couldn't see. Now that you can see it, you're trying to make it fit the categories you already understand. But it doesn't. I'm not the struggling sibling anymore. And instead of being happy about that, you're trying to reposition it as somehow excessive or strange. Because it is strange, and Natalie said. You should have told us. Why? I asked. So you could have opinions? So you could have positioned it differently? So you could have made it about you, instead of letting it be about what was actually needed? The silence that followed was different from the earlier silences. This was a silence where something was breaking, actually breaking, not just adjusting. I could see it in their faces, the moment where the identity I'd maintained for so long simply stopped existing, and they had to contend with the person who actually was standing in front of them. My father was the one who spoke. You built this for us, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. So that you could stay together. So that you could have care that's actually good. So that mom can recover properly and dad can have the kind of support that preserves his dignity. He nodded slowly. He was looking at the space now with a specific quality of understanding. This is what you've been doing, he said. This is what you've been building toward. This is part of it, I said. There's more. The foundation I set up for memory care research. The advocacy work around aging. The technology infrastructure I've developed. I paused. But yes. This is the part that's about you. My mother was crying quietly. Not sobbing. Just the steady, quiet tears of someone who has realized something fundamental about herself that she can't unknow. She didn't apologize, because she wasn't the kind of person who apologized easily. But she was seeing me, actually seeing me, probably for the first time in a very long time. The weeks that followed had a strange quality of excavation. My mother recovered from her surgery better than expected, and her recovery accelerated once she was at the estate with proper support. My father's decline slowed, stabilized even, once he was in an environment designed to support the particular forgetting that was becoming his experience. There was a neurologist on staff, a woman named Dr. Eleanor Walsh who had spent 20 years developing treatment protocols for the kind of cognitive decline my father was experiencing. She was not trying to cure him. She was trying to help him be as fully himself as possible within the constraints of what was happening to his brain. The difference was profound. My siblings visited, awkwardly at first, then with increasing frequency. They saw the transformation. They saw my mother walking again, saw my father engaged in conversation that followed his own logic rather than the logic that others tried to impose on him. They saw, gradually, that I had not done something excessive. I had done something necessary, and I had done it well. Lucas was the first to say it out loud. You should have let us help, he said one afternoon. We were sitting on the terrace, watching our parents in the garden below, where a path had been designed to be both beautiful and navigable for someone with mobility limitations. I needed to do this, I said. I needed to prove to myself that I could. Not to you. To myself. You could have proven it with our support. No, I said. I couldn't have. The moment you were involved, it would have become about your support. It would have been about what you could provide, what you were capable of. I needed to know that I could do something from the ground up, without your infrastructure, without your connections, without your framework of what success looks like. And now? He asked. Now I know, I said. And so do you. My sister was more practical. She wanted to know about the foundation, the research initiatives, the structure of the medical operation. She wanted to understand the logic of it, the market opportunity, the sustainability model. She wanted, in other words, to find a framework that made it sensible within the categories she already understood. I gave her that framework. But I also made clear that it wasn't the real reason I'd done it. The real reason was simpler. I loved them. I had left them. I had the capacity to care for them properly. Therefore, I did. That was harder for her to accept than any of the financial or operational details. Months passed. The seasons shifted. My parents settled into a rhythm that was almost natural, not the rhythm of a care facility, but the rhythm of a life that was being supported by competence and kindness. My mother regained full mobility and then some, beginning to talk about volunteer work again, about projects, about a future that extended beyond recovery. My father had better days and worse days, but even the worst days were lived in a space that understood how to honor what remained of him rather than mourn what was lost. He had a memory care coordinator who sat with him and listened to the things he said, even the repetitive things, even the things that didn't make sense. She helped him find the continuity in his own experience. I was visiting every month, leaving my position at the acquiring firm to step back and build the foundation full-time. I had hired Dr. Walsh as the medical director. We were developing technology that helped families navigate the care process, resources that helped memory care specialists do their work better. We were building something that felt like it was actually addressing the problem instead of just managing symptoms. And quietly, invisibly, my relationship with my siblings was transforming. Not into something like what it had been, because that had been built on false assumptions, but into something more honest. We still didn't entirely understand each other, but we were beginning to accept that we didn't need to in order to love each other. It was Lucas who said it first, one afternoon when we were sitting on the terrace again, watching the summer light do its work on the landscape. "I was jealous," he said, "of you. For a long time. I think I was jealous of the risk you took, and I buried it by deciding that your risk was foolish. That you were foolish. It was easier than admitting that I wanted what you had, the courage to build something from nothing, to not care what anyone thought, to be willing to fail in service of something you believed in. You've done well, though," I said. "You've been successful." "I've been successful at things that were already mapped out," he replied. "I followed a path that made sense. I've executed well on someone else's vision. But I haven't built anything. I haven't risked anything that actually mattered." I didn't have much to say to that. Partly because he was right, and partly because I was beginning to understand that success was more varied than the binary we'd inherited from our family's culture. Some people build. Some people maintain. Some people execute. Some people care for. None of those things is less than the others. But we'd been trained to see them in hierarchy. "You could start now," I said. "You're smart enough. You have resources. You could build something." He considered this. "Maybe," he said. "But maybe I also need to figure out what I actually want before I build it. That might take a while." "Yeah," I agreed. "It might." The epilogue wasn't dramatic because the real work had been done in the unglamorous parts. It was in the daily management of medication. It was in the conversation with my father where he told me, clearly, that he was frightened of disappearing. It was in my mother's hand on my arm, saying simply, a thank you, even meaning it at a level that transcended words. It was in the morning light through the windows I'd chosen specifically for this purpose. It was in watching my mother walk without pain for the first time in years. It was in my father sitting in the garden, looking at his hands like they belonged to someone he recognized, even as the someone kept slipping away. It was in the shift in my siblings' eyes when they stopped trying to understand me on their terms and started asking what I actually meant. The helicopter had done its work. But the real power had never been in the helicopter. It had been in the preparation, in the restraint, in the choice to build something quietly and well and without needing validation. In the ability to return to a place where I'd been underestimated and let my work speak instead of my words. I had left Silver Lake because I couldn't be myself there. Now I was returning to it, not to prove anything, but to take care of people I loved in the way that I could. And the irony, which I thought would feel bitter but actually just felt clean, was that the thing which had made me leave was the same thing which enabled me to return with real power. I was home. Not because I had to be. Because I chose to be. And that choice, more than any acquisition price or medical innovation or beautiful estate, was the thing that actually changed everything.